I'm Lance Barrow, along with the great TCU Hall of Fame football coach Gary Patterson, and welcome to It's Not About Me again. It's a special day because we have, as our guest, we're at the great golf club, country club in Fort Worth, Texas, Shady Oaks Country Club, that was started many years ago by Marvin Leonard, who also started Colonial Country Club right down the road. We're sitting at a table that was donated by Eddie Childs, who started the great oil company, Western Company, who when I was a kid, I remember ads about Western Company. It would always end by, if you don't have an oil well, get one. Gary, you'd love doing business with Western. And he donated this table basically for fellowship, for people who wanted to come and sit down, tell a story, hang out, have a drink. You know, as any golf club and country club should be, is about fellowship. And about 25 years after he gave this table or so, Ben Hogan started coming and sitting at this table here at Shady Oak every day. I wouldn't say he welcomed people because Ben Hogan wasn't that type of personality, but if you had a chance to be introduced and invited to sit at this table with Ben Hogan, you learned a lot. And it's just appropriate to be here today to welcome our next guest on It's Not About Me, the legendary, the great, in my opinion, one of the great human beings on this planet, the great Jack Nicklaus. Jack, welcome. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
My pleasure, Lance.
You know, let's start off right off the bat. You had a great relationship with Ben Hogan.
Yep.
You idolized him as a kid. I would say maybe in the 50s when Ben was at his top. You got to play with him in the third and final round in Cherry Hills in the early 60s at the U.S. Open as a young man. What did you learn from Ben Hogan? What did he tell you? How was that relationship? And it went all the way until the day he passed away.
Well, you know, my dad came to me after the second round and said, at Cherry Hills, 1960, he says, guess who you're playing with the last two rounds? I said, who's that? He says, it's Ben Hogan. I said, oh, that's fantastic. So I'm scared to death that I'm going to play with Ben Hogan and I'm not going to have a word, period for two rounds. Well, Hogan was not that way. Hogan couldn't have been nicer. We talked small talk, around the tee, off the tee. We got anywhere within 50 yards of your golf ball. He focused on what he was doing and went and played. I enjoyed watching him play. He hit, before that round, he hit the previous 18 greens in regulation. He hit the first 34 greens with me until he hit a pitch shot at 17 that just wasn't quite hard enough, went in the water. And but he played fantastic, and I watched that. I watched his course management. I watched his composure and how he played. And in those days he froze over the putter, and I thought, oh, he can't draw it back. Well, he couldn't draw it back, but when he did draw it back, he holed a lot of putts, but he missed some putts too. But anyway, we had a great time, and then we finished that tournament and. I remember Dan Jenkins was saying to Ben after the event, he said, he says, that's too bad, Ben. He says, you had it in your back pocket. You could have won that thing. And he says, always, don't worry about me. He says, I played with a young kid today. If he'd known how to finish, would have won by several shots. Well, obviously that was me. Well, I didn't think anything about that. Of course, I never even heard it, but until later. And then the next year at Augusta, Hogan walked into the locker room and he had a couple of pair of shoes in his shoe bags over his shoulder. And he walked up, he saw me, he says, "Hey fella, how you doing?" And I said, "I'm doing fine, Mr. Hogan. How are you?" He says, "You got a game?" And I said, "No, sir, but I do now." And so we went off and played, and we played a couple practice rounds at Augusta that year. And he just sort of took me in his wing, and he never really told me anything about what he did. He just let me learn by watching. And I think that's the best way to learn anyway. And then the same exact thing happened at Oakland Hills later in the year for the U.S. Open. Walked in, we played 2 practice rounds at Oakland Hills. What a great compliment for you know, a 21-year-old kid to have Ben Hogan come and say, "Come on, let's go play." And
That's
so
awesome.
I developed a relationship. Every time I saw him, he couldn't have been nicer to me. And I think the last time we played was the final round of the Masters in 1966, and I ended up winning that because I ended up winning the playoff. But I really enjoyed my time with Hogan, and all those things about Hogan being tough to be around. I didn't find him that at all. I found him very, very easy, very personable, and could be nicer. I guess that's what he was with somebody he liked.
Well, I'm going to go and say a few names. I'd love to have you just talk about what they meant in your life. Let's start off with your dad. I mean, I know I've heard you many times speak about the influence that he had. He owned a drugstore there in Columbus. He was a really good golfer in his own right. What being raised by him and your family, how did that influence your life?
Well, my dad was not only my father, but he was my best friend. And my dad was a good athlete. He played football, basketball, and baseball at Ohio State. And he played football for the old Portsmouth Spartans, which are now the Detroit Lions, under an assumed name. And he never did tell me what that name was. But I really remember Father Lumpkin, who was the old Rambling Wreck from Georgia Tech. He spelled him at fullback, and then and played defensive end with him. But anyway, uh, he introduced me to everything. We did everything. Golf was just another sport that he introduced me to, and you know, by sort of process of elimination, figured out where I needed to be. And so, but my dad led me through all that. I mean, we'd go out in the backyard, and he'd teach me how to punt. And he taught me how to place kick. He taught me how to throw the football and catch it. And you know, I was a pretty decent quarterback and kicker. And so but it broke his heart when I gave it up. And I gave it up basically through because I ran into golf season, but at that particular time, Woody Hayes was a good customer of my dad's pharmacy, and he walked in and he said, "Woody," he says, "I'm really upset." He says, "Jack's thinking about giving up football." And Woody says, "Well, Charlie," he says, "I've I've watched your son. I've seen your son. I know who he is." And he said, "He's got a talent in something else." He says, "You keep him as far away from my sport as you can." And I thought that was probably pretty good advice from Woody. Anyway, I was a freshman in high school when I gave it up, and I mean the coach was all over me to play. And I think I would have probably started as a freshman, but that's either here nor there. And but anyway, I continued playing basketball, which he introduced me to. Was figured out how to do this, do that, shoot, and so forth. And baseball, he got me to switch hit, which I did. I was a switch hitting catcher, and uh, you know, all the things that he did was he introduced me. But he was city tennis champion too, and he introduced me to tennis. I didn't play tennis till I was over 30, but he introduced me enough as a kid that I was dangerous with it. I could play, and so those are the things that my dad did. He was with me every step of the way, and the beauty of our relationship was, you know, he never interfered with what I did. He was just there. I remember the one time that we had that conversation. We were at the U.S. Amateur at Broadmoor in 1959. I was 19 years old, and we were having dinner after one of the rounds, that second or third round. And he said, "Jack, out there in that round today on the fourth hole, or whatever hole it was," he says, "You hit a chip shot." He said, "You could have putted that. It might have been Dad, timeout." I said, you know, "Dad, I love having you here. I love having you be here, but I've got to do this myself." And he said, "I understand." And he said he never interfered one more time ever. If ever I wanted advice, I'd call him, I'd ask him, but he never offered it. And I think that was a great part of our relationship.
You know, Woody Hayes was a good friend of yours and advice. Gary, can you imagine knowing Woody Hayes as a kid growing up in Columbus, Ohio?
Oh no, that would have been my question. Was it your dad? Was that the spark? Being a coach, the competitive spirit that you had playing. I mean, it was very obvious watching you through the times, and obviously playing all the sports. It was something just came naturally to you, or is it something that he talked about? I mean, so many
I don't
times.
know, Gary. I think that I played all sports. That seemed to come fairly natural to me. You know, Woody was coaching at Ohio State. I used to go over and kick with all the kickers while they had practice. And my junior year at Ohio State, they had a terrible kicker. And all my friends would say, Jack, come on, go out, go talk to Woody, go kick, because you can kick. I probably could have kicked. But, I said, no, I'm not going to do that anyway. And so, but that kicker turned out to be a kicker that kicked for the Chargers for 14 years. he turned out all right. So I'm
Good
glad I didn't go
choice.
once. But anyway, I enjoyed him. Woody welcomed me to his practices. He would go over and he would talk to me. He'd bring me over and talk with all the players all the time, and so I was around it, and I was recruited by Fred Taylor at Ohio State, the basketball coach, when Lucas and Havlicek and that group were there. So I was
Wow.
recruited with all those guys, and I don't know whether I was really recruited for basketball or not, but uh, they didn't give golf scholarships, so that's what they did. But I would have enjoyed playing that, but I would have gotten a lot of splitters that time. I'd have been sitting on the bench most of the time with those guys. Those guys were good. Well, they won the NCAA and were runner up twice while I was there, and so but I was involved in everything, Gary, and I love to play everything. Golf is just another sport to me, till probably probably actually about the time that when I played with Ben Hogan in 1960. I mean, I won the National Amateur. I didn't think a whole lot about it. I was ranked number one, and I said, maybe I'm better than I think I am. I don't know. And then I almost won the U.S. Open at 20. I said, I can play with these guys, and I started thinking a bit more about, competing. And frankly, the only reason I turned pro in 1961 was, I wanted to be the best I could be, and the only way you could do that is to play against the best. And so that's what you did.
I wanted to ask you, speaking about being the best, Jack Grout, who was your instructor for many years, how did you get with him? And then I saw you on an interview recently with Gary Williams at Five Clubs, and you were talking about in this day and age, you go to a driving range at the Memorial Golf Tournament in Muirfield Village, or next week at Augusta. At the Masters, you'll see all these instructors doing lessons and helping out guys. But you said he went to 100 tournaments, but he never really talked to you about golf.
Never once came out of the stands. Jack Grout started me off when I was 10 years old. And I was in a junior class with about 50, 60 other kids, all doing the same thing. After about the second week or so, he'd say, Jackie boy, he says, come out here and show these kids how to hit the ball high. Come out here and show these kids how to hit a little hook. Come out here and show these kids how to hit a little fade. And he used me as an example, obviously to a kid that just, that makes him, you sort of just get excited. And so Jack Grout was, he was just a great friend, and he's like a second father to me. He just took care of me whatever I did. I mean, I love the story. My first I started in June, and the bill came home from Scioto in July from the range, and he had a bill for $380 for hitting golf balls. And in those days, it was 60 balls in a bucket, and they were 35 cents a bucket. Now you can add that up. That's a lot of golf balls for a young kid at 10 years old to hit. And my dad looked at it and he said, Jack, what are you doing? I said, well, Dad, you said you wanted me to learn how to play golf. I said, I'm just trying to learn. He says, okay. He kept his mouth shut. But Jack Grout picked up on that. He knew that he wasn't going to charge me, never charged me for a lesson, never charged me for a golf ball again. I mean, and I go out and play. The juniors had to play before 8 o'clock in the morning, and we could play after 4 o'clock. So I go play in the morning. I get in, and he'd say, "How'd you do today, Jackie boy?" And I said, "Well, I did fine, Mr. Grout." I said, "But I said I had a little trouble with this third hole. I hit this shot, whatever it might be. Just come on, let's go out to the practice team." So we go out to the practice team. We work on that. He said, "Okay, let's go have some lunch." And we go have some lunch. And then he'd say, "Okay." He said, "Well, it's getting close to 4 o'clock." I said, "Yeah, I got to hit a few more balls. 4 o'clock go, and then off I go for another 18. But I mean, that's what I did, and I love that. And it was just, and but the encouragement of my father, the encouragement of Jack Grout, and frankly, many of the members at Scioto at that time were very much, in my court. And nobody ever complained about this young junior out there dominating what was going on in the course.
And another, my last one to ask you about, because I've heard you talk about it when we were sitting having lunch, and I know he meant a lot to you, is Joe Dye. I know he had a lot to do with maybe how the Memorial Tournament got started and things like that, honoring all the honorees that you've done. He was very close to you also. What did he teach you, Jack?
Well, the first lesson Joe Dye taught me, I was 13 years old, and I was playing. I was the first off the tee in the USGA juniors at Southern Hills, and I was playing a fellow named Stanley Ziobrowski, and my tee time was 7 o'clock, and I sauntered up on the tee about 1 minute till 7, and Joe Dye was on the tee. He says, "Young man," he says, "when you come to your tee time, you come a little bit early. You come 1 minute later, you'd have been on the second tee, one down." That was my introduction to Joe Dye. And so he taught me. I never missed the tee time, Lance. And so he started following me. Every time I wanted some advice about golf or something, as I got older, not when I was 14 or 15 years old, but as I got older, I would turn to Joe Dye. And I remember when I was 20, I was thinking about turning pro. Actually, I was 21. And McCormick had come down to see me from IMG. And he laid out what could happen to me if I wanted to turn pro. And so I called Joe Dye. And I said, "Mr. Dye," I said, "this is what's being told to me." And I said, "I don't know what." He said, "Jack," he said, "don't worry about it." He says, "In those days, if you said you were going to turn pro, you were a pro." And so I said, I'm not saying I'm going to turn pro. I said, "I know this, I understand." He says, "But," he says, you want to weigh both sides. You want to figure out where you are." And he says, "What do you want to accomplish?" I said, "Well, I want to be the best I can be." He says, "Well, you better think about what you're trying to do." And he just couldn't have been more wonderful. And anyway, so I turned pro. And then a few years later, he becomes our commissioner. Right? Actually, I think I'm pretty influential in getting him to be the first commissioner. And he came to Muirfield. We walked the golf course in the mud, and we're out there. And he came up with the concept of the Memorial Tournament, honoring the players of the past, and how to take that out of being the responsibility off of me of doing that. And that's how we got the Captain's Club. I watched while you were at CBS. You were part of our Captain's Club, Lance. Mm-hmm. And incidentally, you're welcome back anytime you want to come. You know that. So it was just his guidance that got us to where we are with the Memorial Tournament. The date we got was because of that. We paid our dues on that. I mean, they couldn't just start us off the first year tournament in the prime date. So we played in Cincinnati at Kings Island for 2 years, and then that transferred that tournament over to Columbus up there. And Dye, he was very fair with everybody, and he didn't give me any special preferences, although he knew that we were going to have a really good tournament, and he wanted to make sure that it was.
Yeah, Joe Dye was really the original PGA Tour commissioner. I was fortunate enough, I was living in New York and New Jersey, and he would fly home on Sunday night, and we would sit together on the airplane and love getting to know him. And Mark McCormick was the first super agent who started the company IMG, Gary.
Every time all these names you throw out, the thing that you said a little bit earlier, Jack, about how you were handled. That's what it's one of my things. I was a very intense coach at the college level, but if I went back to the younger years, I would do it exactly the way the two gentlemen did with you, as far as being able to touch and keep encouraging and put you in a situation where you could gain confidence and credibility in yourself. I think it's a great lesson that you talked about there earlier. I think it's more people in this day and age need to listen to that. We have so many different teams, and you got so many people getting in kids' ears, and it turns out not to be any fun anymore. And to listen to you,
Gary, you get kids today, and I think Tiger is the real exception. Tiger had his father at his ear, and his father pushed him. Most 99.9% of those kids will rebel. Tiger absorbed it and went forward. My dad never pushed me into anything. He just introduced me to it. Let me grow. Now, to me, a lesson for kids today is introduce them to the sport. Get as far away from them as you can. Be there for guidance. Be there for questions. Be there for help. I mean, I have a young fella at our club had a couple of kids that were pretty good golfers, and he was over them like a tent all the time. And I said, for crying out loud, get away from those kids. Let them learn to play. I says, once those kids get out of high school and go to college, they'll never touch a golf club again. Oh, no. I said, you gotta give them some air. Yeah. I said, he said, they'll play golf if they want to play golf. If they don't want to play golf, they're not going to play. And so it turns out that the young boy went off to college. I don't think he's touched a golf club since. The girl, on the other hand, he sort of backed a little bit off on her. He even asked me to give her a putting lesson not very long ago. And I said, I'll give her putting lessons. I'd be happy to. But you got to stay away. He stood away about 100 yards and paced. I mean, I'm sitting there watching him. I'm just laughing myself, watching him pace around while I'm giving her a putting lesson. Nice gal, and she's going to be a nice player, because I finally got him to stay away from her. Let her play golf because she wants to play golf, not because you want her to play golf. And I'm sure you find that with many athletes that have come to play football at TCU and wherever. That you can lead them to the water, but you can't make them drink. And so they've got to want to have the passion for it. They've got to want to do it, and they got to want to get involved. And obviously, if you encourage them the right way, you can guide them to wanting to do it. But you can't push them because then once you push them, they'll rebel.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think you're exactly right.
I want to ask you, this is coming up on the 50th anniversary of the 75 Masters. And, a week and a day at about this time, Barbara and you and whoever else will be with you, the family, will be heading back down to South Florida. You've just done the ceremonial first tee shot with Tom Watson and Gary Player. You used to do it with your dear friend Arnold Palmer, which I always tell people back in the day, the night before I'd speak to a corporation, and I would say, if you haven't had a chance to see the ceremonial first tee shot of Byron Nelson, Sam Snead, Gene Saracen, you better be out there in the morning. And I also said the same thing about Jack Nicklaus, Arnold Palmer, and Gary Player, and now Tom Watson. But when you think about the 75 Masters, which some say is the greatest Masters ever played, with Tom Weiskopf that idolized you, grew up idolizing you, and Johnny Miller. What will that be like when you set foot back at Augusta National next week?
To answer your question, we're talking about 1975. And the 75 Masters had Weiskopf and Miller breathing down my throat. And that Watson was there too. I played in the last round with Watson. And until the 16th hole, when Watson hit 3 balls in the water, he was still in the tournament. And but anyway, I was up there last week, and they're going to do a little vignette on Sunday of the 75 Masters honoring that 50th year. And so we went out to the 16th hole, and then we talked about the birdie that the Miller and the birdie that Weiskopf made at 15, and that I had the ability to sit there and watch him do it because Watson was spending so much time in the water. Yeah. And so we really were held up. And I felt so bad for Tom. Tom was a young guy then, just barely coming onto the scene, but obviously a good player. And anyway, we did that. Then we walked over to the green, and they set up the putt. The green's a little different than it was before, so they couldn't exactly get the pin in where they had it, but they're pretty close. About 38 feet, I think, is what the putt was. And so I didn't have my putter, but we had Craig Stadler had a flange putter similar to mine that they got out of the clubhouse, and they brought it out, and I hit 2 or 3 putts, and I said, okay, I said, I think I'm ready to make this thing now, and I hit and knocked it in the hole. And so, and of course Scott Tolley, he had the he had it on film, and of course he put together a little vignette of 75, and then also this one. We had some fun with it. I gotta get Scott to send that to you. You get a kick out of it. But anyway, we did that, and then we did some overt things. They're going to have a little thing on Sunday. So, but that to me was probably, 86 was a year that I wasn't supposed to win, and I came back and won the tournament. But I think 75 was probably the most fun golf tournament down the stretch that I ever played. And I mean, I said that to Miller at the presentation, how fun it was. He said, that's easy for you to say. Well, I understand. I said, but Johnny, I said, had I lost the tournament, I mean, I think that the 77 match I had with Watson at Turnberry, even though I lost it, it was tremendous fun because it was a competition. 2 guys playing well, nobody giving up anything. And here's the same thing again. All 3 of us playing well, nobody giving up anything. And it took birdies to win the tournament. So a putt like I made at 16, and the 2 opportunities that they both had at 18. Miller makes a nice birdie at 17. I mean, it was pretty interesting tournament, pretty much fun. And of course, both Johnny Miller and Tom Wiseoff were both terrific players.
It's amazing that he brought up that he made that putt that he made in 75. Henry Longhurst, one of the great calls in any sport, Oh, have you ever seen anything like that in that British accent? I'm going to go off script here a little bit, Gary and Jack. I've always seen Jack Nicklaus make the clutch shot or putt in my association being around him. Like his final hole at the Open Championship at St. Andrews, he makes it. A few years ago, University of Oklahoma, our daughter Caroline was a cheerleader there. They played Ohio State. So on Saturday morning, the great Nicholas Haraka, the GM of Muirfield Village, said I could bring some people out for brunch the Saturday of the game. So Joe Castiglio, the athletic director, said, why don't we bring our board of trustees? So the whole Nicholas family had come up to Muirfield because there was a hurricane coming to South Florida, and they were also there for the game, and then they were going to go see Jack and Barbara's grandson, Nick O'Leary, play for the Buffalo Bills the next day in Buffalo. So they were the Nicholas boys were out playing, and somebody said, could we go down to the pro shop? I said, sure. And they bought us some shirts, and Larry Dornick, the outstanding great pro at Muirfield Village, God rest his soul, I asked him, I said, are they out playing? He goes, yeah, I took Jack out to meet them at 10. And so I looked at my watch. I said, guys, if we're not in a hurry, we can go watch Jack Nicklaus play the 18th hole here at Muirfield. Here comes Jack with Steven and Jackie and the group, Gary and Michael, and Jack's walking up 18, his ball is right off the green. The board of trustees at University of Oklahoma and their guests are watching. Jack didn't even know we're there. He chips it in. And it's one of the great, you don't even know that. I've never even told you this story. And I turned to him, I said, that's Jack Nicklaus. He's always there, and he never lets you down. He's always there to perform. And it was unbelievable, and they still talk about it. I was up in Norman yesterday speaking at University of Oklahoma, and they were talking about it. We talked about it you were up at Norman, and Barbara came up last summer for the Korn Ferry tour with Scott Tiley, your great PR person. And but yeah, Jack Nicklaus, he never disappointed. I tell people all the time, in my career at CBS Sports, my second ever golf tournament that I ever worked with Pat Summerall after 2 weeks earlier coming out at Colonial Country Club here in Fort Worth asking Chuck Will and Frank Chikinian if I could work. And they put me with Pat Summerall, and then he let me come up, and I sat there in 1976 at the very first Memorial Tournament working for Pat, and I've been there almost ever since. I still tell people doing Super Bowls, Olympics, car racing, Final Fours, whatever, the greatest event I was ever a part of at CBS in my career is the 1986 Masters. And I didn't produce it. I was the replay producer sitting next to the legendary Frank Chikinian. And Jack, Vern Lundquist last year told stories. I was overseas during the Masters last year, and I was getting text about Vern Lundquist telling your story about trying to convince Frank Chikinian to show you on TV, and Frank kept telling me, Jack means nothing. I'm going to send you to drama school. And like I tell people all the time, I went to Abilene Christian. What Frank Chikinian was saying to me is not words that we learned at Abilene Christian. And finally, you birdied the 11th hole, and I told him, I said, Frank, I know Jack means nothing in this golf tournament. He just birdied 11. And he said, cue it up, Buddha. He called me Buddha for some reason. Cue it up, Buddha. Let's get it on the air. But tell us about 86. You had Jackie on the bag. That had to be, when you think back on it now, had to be one of the great thrills in your life to be there with your son.
Well, having Jackie on the bag, and my mother and my sister, the first time they'd come to Augusta since 1959. First year I played, they hadn't been back since. And my sister says, my mom would like to come one more time. So my mother came. My son Steve called me on Sunday morning, and he said, well, what do you think, Pops? And I said, I said, 66 will tie. I think 65 will win. He says, the exact number I had in mind, go shoot it, which is what I shot. So many things happened that week. A yellow shirt for Craig Smith, the young man who had Ewing sarcoma, he wore a yellow shirt for me, so I thought I could wear a yellow shirt for him. And all those things went together. And I went to the last round, Lance. I was 4 shots behind with 8 fellas in front of me. And I said, yeah, that's not that big a deal. I had some pretty good players. I had Norman and Ballesteros and let's see, I guess
Nick
Kite
Price, Greg Norman,
Price,
Tom Kite.
A couple of guys in front of me that were pretty good players. And so I said, but that you never know. It's the Masters. So anyway, went in and I was really excited about playing the front 9. And I didn't do anything. I played the first 8 holes at even par. I made 1 birdie, 1 bogey. And I got to the 9th hole. And I'm about 12 feet from the hole. And I'm a little down. And the big roar goes up at 8. And Ballesteros holds a wedge for an eagle. And before I could putt, another big roar goes up. And Kite holds another wedge from off the green for an eagle. Now I've turned around. And I turned to the people around me and I said, okay, they made some noise up there. Let's see if we can make some noise here. I think that relaxed me. And I knocked the putt in. The people went wild. Then I pulled about a 25-footer at 10, about, 28-footer, I guess, at 11. And now I'm in the middle of the golf tournament. And I'm still well behind, but I moved forward a little bit. And I got to 12 and I missed that short putt, about a 5-footer with a ball mark in front of me, and disappointed. But maybe the best thing had happened, because then I turned around and I focused back in. I made nice, hit a 3-wood and 3-iron onto the green at 13, and made birdie there, parred 14, drove it down the fairway on 15, and I'm sitting there. I was about 214 yards away, and I said to Jackie, I says, "How far do you think a 3 will go here?" And I says, "I don't mean club." And he said, "I can go a long way, Dad." So I hit a 4-iron, and I hit it at about 12 feet, I guess. And I'm still well behind in the tournament. And so I make the putt, and I watched it over to watch Jackie. And Jackie's jumped in the air. And the picture I looked at, I says, "Hey, son," I said, "if you'd have jumped that high when you were in North Carolina, you've been playing with Michael Jordan because they were at school at the same time. And so anyway, then I walk over to 16. Now I'm still biased there, so I believe just eagled 13. So I'm still 4 shots behind. And uh, at 16 pins in behind the bunker, can't see the base of the hole because the bunker blinds it. And I had a 5-iron, 175 yards into a little bit of a breeze, and I hit it. And I reached down, picked up my tee, didn't even watch the shot. And Jackie says, "Be good, be good." And I says, "It is." I mean, I never made a cocky remark like that in my life. And I did there, and it almost went in the hole. Made 2, walked over to 17T. I'm standing on 17T, and I hear this groan and the cheer. Now I know exactly what it was. I mean, it's the people cheering for me, but people groaning for Bias Theris who hit it in the water at 15. And I talked to Sevy early that week, and Sevy said to me, he said, "I'm not real sharp." He says, "I don't know how people handle pressure down near the end of the stretch if I ever get in contention." Well, he obviously got in contention. He played very well. But when you're in contention and you've got and you aren't really as sharp as you normally are, to me, to take a little finesse shot is the wrong place to do it. Was 15. He needed a 4-iron. He should have taken the 5-iron and just popped it. And I don't think I would have won the golf tournament. But he didn't do that. He had a 4-iron. He quit on it just somehow, barely made it halfway across the water. Anyway, now I knew that I was pulled up close to 72, and so I hit my drive up the left side of 17. And everybody said too far left. Well, I wanted it left, and because I wanted the angle into that green, and I had 115 yards left. I hit a wedge. I knew I couldn't hit a wedge too far to hit it over the green, so I could go ahead and pop at it. And I popped it up about 12 feet, and we got up on the green, and I looked at the putt, and I looked at it from this side. Jackie looks, he says, "What do you think, Dad?" I said, "Jackie, I think it's going to go a little bit right, but then it's going to get the influence from Race Creek and it's going to straighten out." He says, "You sure?" I said, "No, I'm not sure, but I think that's what it's going to do." It's exactly what it did. We broke a little right, straightened out, went into the hole. And now for the first time, I'm in lead of the tournament. And incidentally, I've gone back and putted that putt 100 times since, and it has never come back to the left. But anyway, we walked off. I knew I had gotten into or I was close to the lead. I didn't know that I was actually in the lead, but I was. And I had a 3-wood off 18, had 175 left. I didn't want to hit the ball over that green. I think it's awfully difficult to get up and down over that green. And so I hit it. As soon as I hit the shot, I knew where it was. Puff of wind hit me in the face. I knew that it was going to be short. Bounced back to the front part of the green. I was about 40 feet away. And oddly enough, our company had redone the 9th and 18th greens that year. We had changed the pitch from 11.5% to 8.5%. So I was aware of that, and I went and putted that exact putt probably half a dozen times or more in practice round. So I had a little better feel that you don't hit it quite as hard as you normally would have hit it. And of course, I hit it very well. I had knocked it up about 4 or 5 inches, a little bit harder than I made it. And I'm in the hole, and I turned over and saw Jackie. Went over. Probably the best part of the week was giving my son a hug, and I think that to me that's what it was all about for me. And so we got done. We didn't know what was going to happen. I mean, Kite came up very closely behind us. Kite had about a 12-footer at the last hole to tie. He had a very nice putt and just missed it just low. But then Norman, who sort of self-destructed somewhere in the middle of the round, makes 5 straight birdies. And all of a sudden he's coming to 18. And now he needs a birdie to win, par to tie. And he hit a perfect tee shot. Hit it basically about the same place I hit mine. Pulled out a 6-iron and hit the worst pitch out I've ever seen for a good player to do. I mean, he didn't just hit it to the right of the green. He missed the bunker, almost missed all the gallery. He hit it so far right. But then he had a really nice pitch back, and he had probably a 15, 18-footer to tie me, and he missed the putt. And then I knew that I won the tournament. But during that period of time, I was taken over to the Jones cabin. And I was sitting on a couch, and I watched Norman start to make 2 or 3 birdies. And I said, said, he's making too many birdies while I'm sitting on this couch. I said, I got to stand up. I said, I don't want to give him too much good luck. Not that, and I'll never wish anybody bad luck, but I didn't want him to have too much good luck. So anyway, he did not make those, he didn't make the thing at the last hole, so I ended up winning the tournament. It was pretty exciting, Lance. I mean, I was, normally in January, I start thinking about the Masters and preparing for it. And I've done that all my life. And I used to go play the golf tournaments and courses that I thought would help prepare me for Augusta. And I started thinking about Masters in January, but I didn't really start practicing until March. And I had that new big putter, which was, and who knows what that thing was. But anyway, it worked. And, but I remembered how to play and I remembered how to finish. And I sort of liken that to what Tiger did in 2019. Tiger got himself in position after Koepka and Finau and Holter and Molinari and somebody else hit the ball in the water at 12. And they were all playing a right to left shot into the 12th green. And you cannot play a right to left shot in that green. The hole doesn't want that. For some reason, the way the wind comes through there, it kills a right to left shot. Sounds silly, but it does. Anyway, then Tiger stood up and he played this little cut shot off the left side of the bunker into the middle of the green. I said, tournament over. Yeah. I said, he'll remember how to play the last 6 holes. And he did. And he won the tournament. So basically a little bit the same for me. I remembered how to play. And, I hadn't been in contention for a while. But, sometimes, when you've done things, you know what you're doing, and you have the composure to concentrate and work on it, you can make it happen. And that's what I did. And the same thing as Tiger did in 19, he made it happen. So, it was a great week for me. I enjoyed it. Obviously.
I know your great friend, John Montgomery, put a newspaper clipping on the refrigerator in '86. It wasn't really a rip into you not being able to play. It was more of a kind of a tongue-in-cheek kind of article, as why I would read it, that, you were washed up and that because of you hadn't won in a while and things like that. And I know that got a lot of play. I remember that tournament, some of the greatest calls. Jim Nance, if you think about it now, Jim Nance was 26 years old, first Masters that he was doing. Jack almost makes the hole-in-one. Before Jack hit, Jack was standing on the tee. Tom Weiskopf was working for us down in Butler Cabin as one of our announcers. And Jim said to Tom Weiskopf, Tom, you know Jack as well as anybody. What do you think the Golden Bear's thinking right now? And Tom Weiskopf, without missing a beat, said, Jim, if I knew that, I would have won 3 Masters. and then, obviously when Jack tapped in at 16 for the birdie, walking off, Jim Nance said, as a 26-year-old, make no doubt about it, the Bear has come out of hibernation. And then, obviously, the 17th hole, Vern Lundquist was maybe, yes, sir, one of the greatest calls of any sport, right up there with Do You Believe in Miracles by Al Michaels. Jack, I guess last week, Scotty Scheffler put his menu out for the Champions Dinner. And I know when you won your first one, Augusta called you and said, you need to do a menu. And you said, okay, what do they have? And you did a great menu. And then they said, we'll send you the bill. And you go, okay, fine. So, Gary, Scotty's meal looks pretty good.
It does, but, I would say, well, if you came back and they let you choose the meal now in this day and age, what would you choose? What would you have? Yeah, what would you choose for the dinner that night now?
Well, I'll tell you how the story went, Gary. In 1964, I came back and won in 63. Bowman, who was the maitre d', came to me and he said, Mr. Nicklaus, he says, what would you like to have for your master's dinner? And I said, well, Bowman, I said, what do you think Mr. Roberts would like? He said, Mr. Roberts would like a shrimp cocktail, a New York strip, medium rare. He would like a baked potato. He said, like green beans, and he would like a tossed salad with blue cheese dressing, and he would like white Georgia peaches for dessert. And I said, Bowman, that'll be just fine. And I said, Mr. Roberts said, so now Gary, Cliff Roberts ran the tournament in those years, and he was sort of the major domo and sort of, he governed all that went on. So, and I became really great friends with Cliff Roberts. I loved Cliff Roberts. He was wonderful. But that I did that. That's the same thing I had every time, and I do exactly the same thing again.
That's awesome.
Well, I would think too, if I'm right about this, by the way, if you ever get a chance to go to Muirfield Village, I tell people all the time, you got to get a milkshake. It's the best. Them and Castle Pines, arguably Keith Snyder, who was the pro at Muirfield Village and long time just retired as general manager pro at Castle Pines. They argue about which is the best milkshake. But you got to get a Buckeye shake in a glass at Muirfield Village. It is unbelievable. Chef Stephen does an unbelievable job there. But I know you would have butter pecan ice cream. If I remember, that's your favorite ice cream, correct?
I like butter pecan. I think last year at Muirfield, I'm not sure what it was somewhere around 1,300 milkshakes we served during the tournament.
1,300?
Yeah.
Yeah. Gary, you appreciate this. All these pro golfers now have their nutritionists, and they have all these guys with them, and their team and all that. And they talk about they got to eat healthy, and Muirfield Village puts on an unbelievable spread. But I guess these milkshakes are pretty healthy because they walk out like they're going to an electric chair with these milkshakes at Muirfield Village. It's amazing.
Well, the Buckeye milkshake is the number one.
Yep.
That's what they have. I generally have a vanilla malt. I like malt and vanilla. I'm not, but I have a Buckeye every once in a while. But I have maybe one or two half a milkshakes there all week. I mean, if you start drinking the milkshakes in Muirfield Village, it's a guarantee 5 pounds. And so you just those are the Buckeyes. You stay away from both of those, and you'll probably have a good week.
Yeah, one time I went up to meet with Jack, really before I got to know him as well as I think I know him now, and the chef Stephen brought a box, like a cake box, and said Mrs. Nicklaus wanted you to bring home some Buckeyes, Jack. So Jack looked at me and he said, "Have you ever had a Buckeye?" And I said, "I don't know what you're talking about." He goes, "You don't know what a Buckeye is?" I said, "Well, I know what a Buckeye is." He says, "No, it's chocolate with peanut butter, and it's the only place I've ever gone. I've tried Buckeyes other places. They don't even come close to Muirfield Village. And I can pretty well guarantee you, between Jack and myself eating those Buckeyes that were supposed to go home to Barbara, I don't think Barbara got a whole lot of Buckeyes that day because we just kept picking and eating and talking. I tell people one of my great days in my career, spending that with you. I know Charles Schwartzer, I know Trevor Immelman. When they won the Masters, they talked to you before the Masters about how to play the golf course. I know it's around this time. Do you get a lot of players asking you in the last few weeks leading up to Augusta, even while you're in Augusta, do you get a lot of players asking you, "Jack, tell me how to play this golf course"?
I get it occasionally, Lance. I mean, Trevor was the first one to come to me, and he wins the tournament after he talked to me. And then Charles Schwartzel, who's also South African, he heard about Trevor coming to me, and then he called me, and I sit down with him, and then he won the tournament. I said, maybe some magic here somewhere. Maybe I ought to take that and go play it myself. But I had, most recent, I had Max Gracerman yesterday. Max came in and we talked for about an hour and a half in here about how to play Augusta, what to do and how to do it, and so forth. So I'm kind of anxious to watch how Max does this week. I don't want to say too much about Max playing, but he's been pretty close, but hasn't won yet, and we'll see. But I get a few. I thought one of them that I got a big kick out of was Patrick Cantley. Cantley came to me at Muirfield, and he said, "Jack," he says, "I love Muirfield, but he says, I don't know how to play it." And he says, "Can you sit down with me?" So we sat down one year at Muirfield, And I went through how I would play the golf course. He went out and won the tournament. And then he's won it again. So he's won it twice. And, you know, I don't know whether I had that much to do with it, but it had something to do with it, I guess. But I enjoy talking to the young guys. You know, Lance, how many, I mean, you know, kids don't ever listen to their dad, let alone their grandfather. I mean, these kids are all 25 years old listening to an 85-year-old guy. Come on. But they do. And I get a tremendous kick out of it. We've got 30 some of the kids are pros out at the Bears Club, and I see them all the time, and they all come talk to me about different things. Some of them don't stay away, but a lot of them do. I mean, Rory's talked to me a lot. Justin Thomas has talked to me a lot. Eric Van Rooyen, I mean, Dustin Johnson back in the years when Justin was playing. I mean, I spent a lot of time sitting down with these guys and talking to them about how to play, how to think, how to manage their game, and how to handle it when you get into pressure, and how you handle that, and what you do and how you prepare for it. And I, you know, it's reliving what I did, and what I did was so darn much fun for me that I'm delighted to be able to pass that on, and hopefully it helps one of these young kids.
You know, speaking of young kids, Jack, there was a guy by the name of Bobby O'Leary that that came out here 2 days ago. I was just leaving the course, and he'd just leaving the office, and he was coming to play. You don't know him, do you?
He's a piece of work, man, Bobby. Bobby's going to be the president of something someday. I don't know, but I know
he's a go-getter, isn't he? He's a go-getter.
He's definitely a go-getter. He's a self-starter, and I mean, obviously he's my grandson, but I love him, and he's just wonderful.
Yeah, I don't know if a lot of people know that you had a grandson that went to TCU and now lives here in Fort Worth. So
yeah,
really
well,
cool. I love talking to him.
Yeah, well, Billy Rosenthal had a lot to do with him getting to TCU. I never thought he could get into NAU, but he got in there.
Yeah, you know, Billy Rosenthal's here, and you know he's talking about you guys. He's down at the Bears Club with you. You know, Mark Yamagata is here also. We have a good group of people here at Shady Oaks. Elliot Garsick, who was president and tournament chairman at Colonial. I'm always thrilled every time I go in the first tee to see the great name of Jack Nicklaus on the wall. Dr. Bob Marcus is here. You know, Stan Utley, the great short game, who now is around Fort Worth and works out here at Shady Oaks, is listening to us. You know, I got to go, and I've told people this. I get asked all the time, Gary, if you were going to go to any golf tournament other than the Masters or one of the majors, where would you go as a fan? And I have told people for years, you got to go to the Memorial Golf Tournament. And you got to get there and stay all week long and enjoy not only the tournament, enjoy the city of Dublin, enjoy the city of Columbus, go to the Jack Nicklaus Museum on the campus at Ohio State. Go walk around Ohio State and see, you know, there's nothing like seeing the horseshoe and how big it's gotten over the years and the facilities that they have. But you got to be there on Wednesday when they honor the greats of the game. The very first player you honored was Bobby Jones back in 1976. Clifford
Right.
Roberts was there. What was your relation with Bobby Jones?
Well, you know, I first met Bobby. Well, first of all, let's back it up. My dad's hero was Bobby Jones. My dad was built and looked a lot like Bobby Jones. He parted his hair sort of in the middle like Bobby Jones. My dad watched Jones win the Open at Scioto in 1926. My dad was, I guess, 12 years old at the time. And then they had the Ryder Cup at Scioto in 1931. And
Wow.
so my dad was, let's see, he was about 18 at the time. And he was walking by the clubhouse and somebody spotted him and he said, "Oh, hey, Mr. Jones." He says, "We got a seat for you in here." So my dad would go along with any of that kind of stuff. He would have a lot of fun. So they pulled him in the clubhouse until they found out who he was and they kicked him out. But, you know, he Jones has always been his idol. Well, so all I had was, as I grew up, there were a lot of members who seen the Open in 1926 when I started playing in 1950. And so I got stories. Bob Jones hit it here. Jones did this. Jones never parred the ninth hole. Did this, he did that, so forth. Well, anyway, I had that. And then when I qualified for the National Amateur for the first time, I was 15 years old. I went to the Country Club of Virginia, James River course in Richmond. And Bobby Jones was a speaker at the banquet. And at that point in time, he could walk with sort of canes. And the last practice round, I hit a shot up to the green. It was a windy day, and I walked off the green, and he waved to me to come over. And I didn't have a clue who it was. And so I walked over and he introduced himself. He said, "I'm Bob Jones." I said, "Oh, hi, Mr. Jones." He says, "Yeah." He says, "I've been here for an hour or so." And he says, "You're only the third person to reach a screen in two." And I said, I thought that was pretty good. And I said, "Okay, thank you, Mr. Jones." That was about the end of it. He spoke at the banquet that night. Then he caught me as I was going out of the banquet, and he caught my dad. And he says, "Jack, I'd like to come out and watch you play a little bit tomorrow. I'm 15 years old, and Bob Jones is going to come out and watch me play golf." So I'm looking all day over my shoulder, and I'm playing Bob Gardner. Bob Gardner turned out to be a Walker Cup and Eisenhower Trophy player after that period of time. But Bob Gardner was a good player. I hit him one down after 10. And so we're all of a sudden down the 10th fairway comes this cart. And I'm watching this cart coming down and saying, "Oh my gosh." Well, anyway, I proceeded to go bogey, bogey, double bogey. And I now went from one up to three down, or two down. And Jones turns to my dad. He says, "Charlie," he says, "I don't think I'm doing Jack any good out here. I'm going to slip out." So I ended up actually getting back to even and lost the last hole. But anyway, the next time I saw Jones was I was 17, and he came to the JC Juniors at Columbus, and he represented Coca-Cola to present the trophy, and we talked quite a bit while he was there, and I enjoyed that. And then the next time was a Masters in when I was 19, and there was a note in my locker and said, "Jack, I'd like to invite you and your father to come down to my cabin and talk to me." So we did. We went down to cabin, and we went down every year after that. And I love the opportunity to go down and have Bob Jones talk to me about his philosophy and how he was taught by Sterling Maiden, and how he became a golfer, and how he became responsible for his own game, which is exactly what Jack Grout taught me, to be responsible for my own game. And so Bob Jones said, he says, "I had my 7 lean years." And he says, "I didn't become a golfer until I stopped running back to Sterling Maiden every time I missed a shot." And he said, "When I stopped doing that, that's when I became a golfer." And I said, "Well, it's very interesting, because that's what Jack Grout has taught me." And when I said Jack Grout never came out of the stands one time to give me a tip or a lesson, he didn't. And Maiden never did the same thing with Jones. So I think he became a better golfer because of that. And I think I became a better golfer because of that. But I had a wonderful relationship with Bob Jones. I mean, it's pretty hard for a 25-year-old and a 60-something-year-old to be very close. But I said, as they could be, we were. And he just, my dad's idol. I have to say, was my idol in the game of golf, and the way he handled himself. The day after I turned pro, I got a letter from Bob Jones. And the letter said, "Jack," he said, I said, "I'm writing this letter to let you know that, to encourage you to remain amateur." He said, there hasn't been an amateur in the game who has done anything, similar to what I've done since you came along. And the amateur ranks could use that. He says, "However," he says, "I understand that the draw to play against the best and to play in the financial world of golf today is very inviting. And if you happen to decide to go that direction, I just want you to know that I've had a wonderful relationship with Spalding all my life," which I got a big kick out of. So it was not only to ask me to stay amateur, but also a plug for Spalding. Well, anyway, I got that letter's in the museum. It's a nice letter, and it was he was just very nice to me. In 1962, when I won the Open at Oakmont, I had a putt for about 5 feet on the 71st hole, and I had a downhill slider that I just put in the back of the cup, and I missed the cup. It's going roll right off the green. And he said, Jack, he wrote me a note. He said, Jack, when you hit that putt at 17, he says, I came right out of my chair. Well, of course he couldn't, but that was his phrase and stuff. But anyway, I had a nice relationship with Jones, and and then I set my goal on. I didn't really think about it much, but 1970 I won my 10th major, and Bob Green, AP reporter, said to me, Jack, 10 majors now, only 3 more to go to tie Bobby Jones. Oh, I'd never thought about it, never entered my mind. And so I got to Canterbury, and I'd won 13 that time, and I won at Canterbury to go win my 14th major and break Jones's record, which was a very happy day for me, but a very sad day too. Because I respected Jones and what he had done so much.
All right, so tell me about this year's honoree at the Memorial Golf Tournament.
Special person, Lance.
Yeah, no, and a very special person. So,
and I think my son Gary is really sort of responsible for that. Gary was sitting there and he says, Dad, he says, you've honored everybody in the world except the one person that probably needs to be honored the most, and that's your wife, Barbara, my mother. And I said, Gary, I don't think it even entered her mind. So I called Charlie Meacham. And I said, Charlie, I don't want to get involved in it. I don't think I should. I said, I leave the suggestion that Gary made. I said, I leave this up to you to check it back. He said, he called me back about 2 days later. He said, Jack, I've canvassed the Captain's Club unanimous. So they selected Barbara. And, I think it's really very special that somebody who is not a golfer to be honored at the Memorial Tournament, and somebody who's meant so much to the tournament and obviously so much to me. 65 years of marriage is a long time, and so we're going along. We're going along fine, and it's going to be a special ceremony. I know that Charlie's coming. He's going to be at the ceremony. I think he's going to talk to Barbara, and I'm sure that each of the kids are probably going to end up saying something. So it's going to be very nice. I don't know whether Dad can get out any words or not. I'm having a hard time even talking about it here.
I know when Jim Nance and Trevor mentioned it and asked you, as we always did at CBS on Saturday or Sunday, and you announced the honoree, I saw watching the tournament, you had a hard time getting it out.
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
Well,
a hard time talking about ones you love.
Somebody said to me, can you believe they're going to do Barbara Nicklaus as the honoree? And I said, I can't believe she hadn't already been the honoree. That's shocking, but
She should have been second right after Bob Jones.
I've told you many, many times, and like I said, this podcast is not about me, but one of my greatest honors and one of my greatest professional thrills was being a part of the Captain's Club for the few years I got to do it and sit in the room with the who's who of golf. And every Wednesday since I kind of semi-retired from CBS, I'll send a text to Stephen and Jackie saying, keep my seat warm there. It was always Stephen Nicklaus, Jackie Nicklaus, myself, Hale Irwin, and on and on and on. We always sit by each other, and just to be a part of the men and women of that group, and then to be there, and now to hear Barbara Nicklaus will be the honoree. They also honor a person from the media. Two of my great colleagues, Frank Schickinney and Jim Nance, has been honored over the years, and that's also the great thrill to see their name up on the board. Jack, Gary and I could sit here for hours. There's a lot of questions I want to ask you, but I guess my last question is, when you look back on your legacy as a human being, what do you want people to say about you?
Well, it's not what people to say. It's what I want my family, Barbara, my kids, my grandkids, my great grandkids. That hey, he was a good guy. He was a good father, a good grandpa. That to me is the family is the most important thing. I don't, golf's a game. Golf is, you can, a few 4-foot putts and you never would have heard of me. But to raise a family and have a family be near you and want to live near you, and want to work with you, and want to be part of what you're doing is so special to me. That's my legacy as far as I'm concerned. You know, golf has been great. It's allowed Barbara and me to get involved in being able to give back to others. It's been a lot of things that hopefully that allowed us to do better things. But the family is obviously the most important thing to me.
Well, I can speak on a personal note. I want to thank not only you, Barbara, your family. One of the great thrills I tell people all the time is when Jack Nicklaus says my name. Sometimes it's not always in a good part, but most of the time it's in a good part. But when Jack Nicklaus says my name, I always kind of look around and see who's he talking to. And one of the thrills that I had in my career was doing the memorial tournament and being able to go up and have lunch with the great man and his family, like Stephen and Jackie and Nicholas Araka and whoever else joins us. Jim Nance and I would do that. I know Jim still does that. And Jack, I cannot thank you enough. One of the great blessings that the good Lord gave me was getting to know not only you and Barbara and your family and be able to call you dear friends. And I thank you for that. That's
okay,
awesome.
My friend, I appreciate that. Likewise here. Gary?
Well, thank you very much.
Nice to talk to you all, and wish you well with your show.
Well, thank you, Jack, and thank you for doing it. Scott Tiley, thank you so much. Nicholas Araka for helping out the people here at Shady Oaks Country Club. And we'll be watching that first tee shot next Thursday. I think last year you said beware on the right side, beware on the left side before you hit the shot.
Right, left, on the ground and up in the air. Hopefully it's up in the air.
Thank you, Jack. Thank you for doing this with us.
Okay, guys. Thanks. Appreciate it. Take care.
See you soon, Jack.
Thank
Give everybody our love.
Thank you so much.